to Spark TV.
Thank you for having me. This is fabulous. I feel like we were just having a giggle, weren't we? Because we were like, we better actually start recording, or we're just going to sit here and just talk to each other for the rest of the
Oh my
afternoon.
God. I know. And it's so funny because it's like, this is my favorite part of my job. I just like jumping on and talking to cool women in business. And it's so fun when that does happen. Then I'm like, oh my God, we've just talked about all this amazing stuff. If we don't hit record, we'll never talk about it again.
Very true. Very true.
Oh, I love it. So let's start out by telling everyone who you are and what you do.
Or big love that question. Look, I always like to start with who I am as the human because I feel like what I do is not who I am. So who I am as a human is my name's Claire Seeber. I really, really believe that the world needs more heart, more humor, more honest conversation, human to human. So I try to bring a lot of that into all the kind of connections that I build, the relationships that I have. Try not to take myself too seriously. And I believe a belly laugh should be part of every day. Love a good glass of wine, love to travel. So that's kind of, I am the ultimate hype girl, ultimate cheerleader, which probably then has translated well into the work that I've ended up doing. So I have the pleasure of working with individuals and organizations all over the world, doing kind of training, coaching, a lot of speaking as well on all things leadership and career advancement strategies. And it's a great space to play because what I found really interesting is that irrespective of the industry that you're working with or the kind of business that you're working with, the product they're selling, the service they're offering, whatever it is, like human beings at their core all still want to feel heard, seen, valued, and understood. And so, as far as like the work that I do, whether I'm working with small business, an enormous global business, and everything in between, like the way we treat human beings and work together is still the same. So, that's what lights me up. That's what I do. I've just had a book come out as well. So, I've just had an author to the number of slashy titles that I've now
Is that the
got.
one behind you that I can see? Less hustle, more happy?
Yes, less hustle, more happy. Just hit
Oh,
bookstores at the end of August, all across the country. So that's been a
congratulations.
thank you. It's been super exciting, a bit like fucking terrifying sometimes,
Oh
but
God, I can
exciting.
imagine. Oh, I love it so much. And I love how you started out. You are the only person after over 200 episodes that has ever told me who they are outside of their business.
Why?
Wild. I was just sitting here thinking, oh my God, isn't that so interesting? I feel like, and look, this is a business podcast, so I'm not whatever, but I think about that of myself as well. My identity is so wrapped up in my business and what I do. It's only lately that I kind of think about who am I outside of my
Yeah.
business? But I also love how all of those parts of you translate into your business, which is probably why you're so passionate about your business because you've built a business around the things you value.
Yeah, and I don't know if I think I had elements of consciousness of that at the time. But now it's so easy in hindsight. Now looking back at it, like it is so clear to me how I've landed, where I've landed and kind of the work that I'm doing. And some of those earlier questions that I asked myself, years ago, I'm really seeing the fruits of those now. But that's so interesting that people, I just am a really big believer in like we're so much more than what we do. And I think as business owners, like, and don't get me wrong, I still fall into the trap all the time around I like being so tied to my business. But I've learned over the years as well that when we think or we forget that we're so much more than just what we do, I think challenges or roadblocks or rejections become such bigger things because we've put everything into the one basket. Whereas when we're really deliberate about all the other things that I am too, it it becomes easier, I think, to navigate the challenges and the pain.
Yeah, and it is really interesting. I think that separation of self and business I really fall into this trap as well, where I think I'm not allowed to be happy because I haven't hit said goal. And then it's like, well, it's 6 o'clock and you're having dinner with your partner and he gives zero care about the goal you have inside your business. Maybe you should just be in the moment and be happy and set that to the side and remember that you are a human being having a human experience with somebody you love. And the I haven't launched that course or hit that revenue goal or done XYZ really doesn't matter where you are right here, right now.
Mm, yes, I resonate with that so much. And that's funny because like 30 minutes before I jumped on this podcast, I just finished recording an episode for my own podcast. And the title was, or the topic is the to-do list ever really done?
No, I
And
can tell you the
yeah,
answer.
no, totally, no. And it was
Oh.
exactly what you were just saying around like we put this unnecessary pressure on ourselves as business
Mm,
owners where it's almost like, I mean, I used the example on the potty just then around like rest as a reward for hitting a milestone, but I love what you're saying as well around like happiness as a reward for hitting a milestone, and it's like
mm.
I'll only give myself permission to do that upon whatever bright shiny thing that I've achieved that I maybe haven't even asked myself the question of like, why do I want that? What does that get me? What is it all for and at what cost? And then it's like we handbrake ourselves for being able to be in the moment, being able to probably enjoy the reasons we got into business, e.g., being with our partners and our families or things like that, because of the thing we think we have to achieve before we can enjoy it. I think you're like, yeah, we're drinking the same Kool-Aid.
I know, but it's so wild though, isn't it? I listened to a great podcast the other day, and it was talking about, if you met someone at a party that was like, you haven't worked hard enough today, you'd be like, who the hell is that person? I don't want to be anywhere near them. But that's like the voice in our head. So it's like,
Yeah.
why do we treat ourselves like someone that we would never want to hang out with?
100%. It's like the inner slave driver or the inner
Mm.
hustler is,
Yeah.
all of those. It's all of the self-limiting beliefs. It's the martyr. I think the kind of martyr syndrome
Yeah.
sometimes where we think like we have to be all of the things all the time. But I think it's really important as business owners in particular. I mean, I talk about it a lot from a career lens, but having a business is part of your career. So it's all much the same thing
Mm.
around like, what is it all for? Like,
Yeah.
what is it all for? And yeah, it's to make money, but I could burn myself to the ground to hit that revenue target just so I can tick the box and say, yeah, I hit, whatever the target was.
Mm.
Yet I'm miserable. I have had no time with my family. I'm unhealthy. I'm not sleeping. I've got stress ulcers. And cool, but I ticked the goal. I hit the
Mm.
milestone. But it's like the at what cost part, right? And is there maybe a reframed goal that we have to ask ourselves sometimes around like what is it actually all for?
So, is this segueing into what your book is about? Because less hustle, more happy seems to lend itself to actually asking ourselves those questions.
I mean, look, less hustle, more happy is definitely like all of my. Can I swear on this podcast?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Oh,
called
cool.
a wine with. Inherently, it's off the rails.
Like less hustle, more happy is definitely all of my a book built on my fuck ups. So I'm like, yeah,
I
in the
love it.
hope that other people can't. But I just think, it's probably more to do with what you said at the very start around the fact that I've been the first person to introduce myself as the human instead of a list of job titles that we hold as business owners. And to me, that's the essence of everything. Life is more. And this is like totally a business podcast, and like we can totally talk and we'll talk about all that stuff. But
Mm.
how do we make sure that as business owners, like we didn't just buy ourselves a job? And I've had this conversation with myself a number of times over the years.
Yes.
Like, I want to make sure I didn't just buy myself a job where now I'm just earning less and working harder, but
Yeah.
and I'm miserable, but I'm not going to tell people that because like I run a
Because
business.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like it is to me, it always will come back to like, who are you? What is it for?
Mm.
And is all of the steps you're taking in your business getting you closer towards that or further away from that? So yes, I guess like less hustle, more happy definitely touches on some of that stuff.
It's such an interesting question to reflect on. So what is it all for? Because I feel like sometimes we get stuck in our to-do list, speaking of to-do lists, and all of the things and the client delivery and the this and the that. And find ourselves a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, thinking, what the hell did I just do with my life? So I'm a
Yeah.
really big believer in the stop and ask ourselves those critical questions and explore and have conversations with people. And I just think it's such a beautiful question to ask yourself, what is it all for?
What is it all for? Here's one for you too. We get on average, if we're lucky to live to the global average age of 70, we get 25,550 days. And of those,
Wow, I just got goosebumps.
most of us will work in some capacity for nearly 2/3 of that time, right? Whether it's running
Mm,
our own business, when it's in a career, part-time jobs, casual jobs, everything in between. Don't we want to know beyond just paying my mortgage? Like,
yeah.
don't
Yeah.
we want to know what I kind of want to get out of it? And even if that clarity is just, it's a feeder for me to spend time with my kids, it's a feeder for me to work at home, and do school pickups and drop-offs, like whatever it is, like even that gives you
Mhm.
the why to then withstand the how or the what, or those
Yeah.
challenging days or the rejection days where you're like, nobody's buying what I'm selling. Why? Right? Like you can still keep going back to like, when you want to flip a table and just go back to a job,
Yes.
reminding ourselves of like, what is this getting me and what is it for?
Yeah, and it's so powerful to have that anchor, isn't it?
Mm,
It's actually really funny. I'm launching a course on how to start a podcast, and I don't know, it feels like the hardest freaking thing I have done in a long time. Like I don't know why though. Like I know the content, I've published hundreds of episodes, I've done courses before, but for some reason I'm really struggling to get through this course. And I'm right on the home stretch. So it's like the last 20% that's like the toughest. And, I'm just, as you're talking, I feel like, that is the answer. What is it all for? Like actually having that anchor to remind myself why I'm actually doing the hard things.
yeah,
It's so important to have that, once we called it the why we're doing things. But I think it goes deeper than that, and to really understand, and what's coming up for me now is like the delayed gratification. I think about what is it all for? Is it all for, in a decade's time I get to be happy, or in a decade I get to do this? I'm like, no, that's actually not what it's all for. You are
yeah,
so right when you said a lot of us created these businesses for these micro moments like spending time with our family or vacationing more or being able to take our kids to school or whatever that looks like for anybody who's started a business. But I think, yeah, we sometimes get so wrapped up in things that we do forget that anchor.
absolutely. And especially like with the world we're in too around, I don't know about you, but I have felt as a business owner constant pressure over
Mm,
the years to have to do all of the things like,
yeah.
even just like social media as an example, right? Like Insta and Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok. And now like I've got to learn this software and I've got to learn this software. Oh, but now people are doing this and I just mastered this, but that's not in vogue anymore. You've got to do this instead. And now I've got to have a podcast and a YouTube. And I've got to build courses and I've got to do all of the things that it's unless you're really intentional
Mhm.
around it's going to probably sound like a Hallmark card, but like
Yeah.
unless you're really intentional around backing yourself, there will
Mm,
be a reason every single day to feel like you aren't doing enough.
mm,
And that's the other reason why I think that the anchor is so
yeah.
important because it helps you kind of manage, I think, the to-do list a little bit better and like, well, I've only got finite amount of time. So is doing all of like these things actually getting me closer to the anchor, or is it just spreading myself even thinner for for an impact that I don't think's actually getting me the outcomes I'm looking for? And that's been a huge thing for me over the last few years.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I always go back to the Instagram example, like with the reels thing, right? And I get so many women in business who are like, I don't want to dance on reels. And I'm like, well, don't. Like, there are so many things that you can do.
Yes.
I love that. Is this task actually getting to me towards that thing? Like, what is it all for? Why am I doing this? What is my anchor? Is dancing on reels actually going to get me there? Probably not. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see that. But it is, you're so right. Like there is just a sea of things that we can be filling our time with and always telling ourselves that we're not doing enough and that we haven't hit our goal because we're not doing enough.
Yeah, and then that just feeds the beast, right?
Mm.
Like it just feeds the slave driver beast. That's like, well, there you go. You need to be working longer hours, sacrificing your flexibility, your health, like whatever it is. So it's just, I am so open about all this stuff because I
Mhm.
just feel like it's been such a barrier for
Yeah.
me. And I do not sit here either, being that person that's like, I'm past it, so do what I did, because I'm not past it at all, at
Yeah.
all. But if I look back, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I can see the impact of putting better habits in place. So that for me then like just gives you the fuel to kind of keep going.
Yeah. So what habits have you put in place? Talk me through some tactics we could steal from you.
Yeah. I I think it's going to come down to the kind of work that you do. But
Mm.
I think back to when I first start. So long story cut short, like started my last big corporate job was the head of HR for a big retail company in Melbourne, big retail e-commerce company. And then I started my side hustle doing kind of leadership coaching on the side about 2018. 2019, my husband and I both quit our jobs, both quit our corporate jobs. We sold everything we owned in Melbourne and
Wow.
we packed up the rest and put it in a shipping container. And then we took off for a year in 2020 to travel the world.
Oh, how did
2020.
that go? Oh my
It
God, that's
did.
wild.
It did not go according to plan,
Mhm.
obviously.
Mhm.
And long story cut short, we got 3 months nearly up front, which were great. Then things obviously turned very quickly.
Mm.
Ended up stuck on a small sailing boat at sea, rationing food for 10 weeks, but that is a
Oh
whole
my
nother
God,
episode.
there's a whole book in that. Yeah.
and and then I ended up basically running my business and then we finally got back to Australia, couldn't get back to Perth. They wouldn't let us come back. So we brought a secondhand four-wheel drive and a rooftop tent. And we just drove up the East Coast indefinitely until we were allowed to basically come back. And so I
That's
kind of ran my business from the roof of our car essentially for 6 months. And I was at the point where I knew I wanted to, like, I knew sort of what I kind of wanted it to be like, but I was saying yes to all of the things. And
Mhm.
I found myself saying yes to things that I'd made the decision that I didn't like. And yet I said yes to them because I was so scared that if I don't say yes to this, like nothing else will come. And so I
Yeah.
think that was one of my first habits to get into, was around understanding for yourself what good work looks like for you.
Mhm.
But then probably the bigger trap that I fell into, that I've now kind of built better boundaries around, was I also was saying yes to every client all over the world against their own agenda and their needs. And so like what I mean by that as an example was, because I was doing one-on-one coaching at that time, I would have a client in Canada who would book into my diary at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And
Mhm.
I'd be really angry. I'd be so internally ragey about it and be like, this
Yeah.
is so unfair, la 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 la, like this, it shouldn't be this way. And then like as if I couldn't change it.
Yeah.
And so for probably
I love
like
that about us. Yeah.
like the first 12 months, I'd get up at 2 o'clock and do a coaching call because someone booked it into my diary because it was showing as an available option.
Mm.
So of course, for them, they're like, great, this works in my diary. I'm just going to book it in. And then I'm angry about that. And I really slowly became like resentful and annoyed by how accessible people expected me to be, when in reality, no one expected it at all. And in fact, whenever I got on these calls or ran workshops at like, and they'd be like, oh, it's really dark where you are. What time is it? I'm like, oh, it's 2 a.m. And they're like, what? And I'm like, oh, it's fine. It was not fine, but I
Fine.
allowed it to be fine. And so
Yeah.
I look back at that now when I think about some of the practices that I now have, it is being explicit around like when you're on and when you're not, when you're accessible and when you're not. And so that's sounds so obvious, I know. But in the earlier stages of building my business, I didn't even have like anyone anywhere could basically book into my diary 24 hours a day, Monday to Friday. Whereas now, clients, I am only accessible for client facing work on certain days and at certain times. And then I've got a day that is for purely kind of working on the business. And then I've got Fridays, I don't even want to touch anything. Do I do it 100% of the time? No, but I do it 80% of the time, which is so much better than being open and accessible to all of my client base anytime. And that, for as obvious as that now sounds, I cannot believe it took me like 18 months to get to that point.
Oh, it's just hilarious. I did exactly the same thing. And I'm just, you're so right. Like you do work yourself up and get resentful. And then I'm like, oh, I'm the one in charge here.
Yeah.
It's crazy what you think you have to do, how you go through that resentful thing, and then you kind of have this brainwave of, oh, it's actually my business, it's actually my life. I am allowed to design it the way that works for me.
Absolutely. And it's that piece too around because there might be people listening that are like, yeah, but what if I what if I don't, what if I do push back or I have a boundary or I don't say yes to the work and then nothing else comes? Because like I totally remember dealing with that as well.
Yeah.
And I just think that it isn't as an all or nothing game. So
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, there are still times when I will work outside of a boundary or I'll fit something in that I wouldn't have previously. But I think that it is about ask again, it's like going back to those questions around, is this getting me closer to why I got into this game to start with?
Mm.
And trying to make our decisions based on that. And all of the times where I said yes to if I really look back now, all of the projects that I said yes to and had that inner dialogue around, well, if you don't say yes to this, nothing else will come. Even though the other voice was like, I really don't want to do this, but I did it anyway. I wished I didn't.
Oh,
I
your
wished I
gut
didn't.
knows, right?
Yeah.
You always
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely. Like there's none of those experiences I look back at and I'm like, oh, well, that actually worked out really well. No, it
Yeah.
didn't. I should have said no.
Oh my God. It's really interesting because I've been wanting to ask you about leadership because obviously your business is built around leadership. And it's just, it's something that's falling into place for me right now is, it's almost our ability to lead ourselves
Yes.
first. So do talk to me about that. So you specialize obviously in leadership, and you mentioned that you do coaching for individuals, for organizations. Talk me through what that looks like.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying around leading yourself first because even anything that I do, whether it's working like workshops inside organizations or it's working with individuals, they'll often they'll often come to me with I'm feeling stuck or I'm feeling unfulfilled or this person's doing this wrong and it's making my life difficult or my team aren't doing what I'm asking them or they keep coming to me with questions all the time and they want me to give them the solution to those things. And then when I'll often ask them, well, how do you think you're showing up right now in this situation or in this environment? And what impact do you think that might be having? I'll often get a face that's like, what? Like, it's not about me, it's about them.
I
I
love
didn't come
that.
here to talk about my leadership. I came here
I'm
to talk about
obviously
them.
perfect. Mm,
And, the reality is like we cannot actually lead other people. We cannot lead businesses effectively if we can't lead ourselves. And in
mm,
order to lead ourselves, we have to know ourselves. We have to know the the strengths that we have. We also have to know the weaknesses that we have. We need to know what happens to you when
mm,
you're under pressure, when you're under stress. What happens to you? Like I could have two people in the same workshop and I'll point to, I don't know, a tree outside and I'll say, describe that to me. And they'll see two totally different things.
mm,
But or they'll add meaning. They have a different meaning for what that is. We're all looking at the same stuff. And so if you don't know like your inner world and what's going on there and the impact that it has, it's really hard then to lead other people effectively and have better conversations. Like, for example, I'll often get leaders come to me around feedback conversations, and they're like, "Oh, can you give teach my team a workshop around how to have feedback conversations?" No problem, love that. But again, I'll always start the workshop with understanding yourself, a little bit about yourself first, because, for example, if you know that you've got to have a difficult conversation with somebody, right? But like, and so let's say it's a supplier or somebody who's, I don't know, the service that they're giving you is a bit average. They haven't been following through on deadlines, whatever it might be. I can give you a framework, right? Like I can give you a lovely little acronym on a poster with the steps to have the conversation. But if deep within you, there's a part of you that views conflict as being really, really bad, or conflict
mm.
as a failure, or there's a part of you that doesn't believe you're, I don't know, worthy of having those assertive conversations, the framework doesn't mean shit.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why, like, when we talk about leadership, I think leading yourself to lead a business, to lead a team effectively is so, so important.
Oh my God. So are you telling me the reason I can't have difficult conversations is because my mum told me it was bad and we shouldn't fight and we shouldn't talk about things? We should bury it deep inside?
We sound like the same person. And like,
Oh my God.
what?
I've literally just gotten myself into a pickle because I was a bit too polite. Someone was selling me something and I was like, oh my God, I don't want this, but I don't want to be rude. So I was like, oh, okay, just send it to me. And now I've dug myself a hole and kind of it's actually turned into a bit of a conflict because I'm like, I don't want this thing. And I was just couldn't have a hard conversation with you.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's wild.
It's like I am that person who will order something in a restaurant, the wrong meal will come out to me. And the person I'm with will be like, you didn't order that. And I'm like, it's fine. And,
It's
and
fine.
like, because I'm like, I don't want to upset them.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
like,
It's
it's
their job.
so, like, it's just like I ordered chicken and you gave me a steak or, whatever. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, it's fine. Not a problem. So it's just, I think we have to know ourselves in order
Mm,
to know, like, how do we, exactly what we're saying, like, how can I have the conversations that I need to have to
yeah.
coach my team or to coach if you've got a VA, as an example,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of people listening that have got like VAs or support teams and they feel frustrated sometimes where they're like, and I've done this before too, where I'm like, oh, like, why are they not doing what I'm asking? When the reality probably is that I have not communicated it to them effectively. I've
Yes.
just assumed that they can read my mind. And I've got too many things on the go at the moment that I'm doing, 100 things to the 10th of the level that I need. I've got to have the discipline to check in with myself to know that if I want to actually improve my ability to get outcomes from the people that I'm paying.
I love this so much because I just made all of these mistakes rather than having someone like you that could teach me the ways. I just like made mistakes for a decade and, oh, that's obviously not working because they quit, or that's not working because they're not doing their job. But this is so good. Like, I just feel like for any small business owner, whether when you're in that stage where you're like, okay, yeah, I need a VA, or I'm hiring my first full time employee, I just feel like we do need to be leaders. We are stepping into a new role, and that is super scary, but I think is going to have a huge impact on the success of our business.
100%, 100%. And it'll be, I think, and I fall trapped to this too. Like it'll be that thing where we're like, but I don't have time. Like I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But then the lessons that I've learned, like much like you, the hard way is like, well, I sure as hell don't have time to continue fixing their mistakes and like cleaning up their mess that I essentially contribute to the creation of in the first place. So it is sometimes that short-term sacrifice for medium long-term gain.
Yeah, that lesson of that I don't have time, that statement is always a recipe for disaster. Like actually taking time to document processes,
Yeah.
train someone effectively, hire better, all of those, have better conversations, have hard conversations earlier, all of the things that we put into this feels uncomfortable, so I'm going to say I don't have enough time to do them, are always the answer. Actually investing that time when you perceived yourself you don't have it is always going to make things better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So inconvenient though, but
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Totally. And uncomfortable and inconvenient. And I would rather be drinking a wine. Let me tell you, you can write great process documents over a glass of wine. That's my trick. If you got a boring job to
Yes.
do it with a glass of wine in your hand.
I feel that. I feel that. I also find sometimes like when I sit with a glass of wine at, like late, if I know I've got to do some stuff at night and I'm like, okay, I'll sit with a glass of wine. I am quite creative. So that I find you get a little second wind sometimes when
Oh
I don't
my
know, I need
God.
to write
Yeah.
socials or newsletters or whatever it might be. And I'm like, this is
I,
bringing some good stuff out. I mean,
I get a
proofread
little
it tomorrow, but
sassy. I get a little sassy on my socials when I've got, you can always tell which ones I had a wine in my hand.
love it.
Oh my God, it's so good. I love it. I feel like we could talk all day. However, it would be prudent to wrap up. So tell me, reflecting on your time in business, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to another woman in business on her journey?
The first one that I'm just going to go with the first one that comes into my head, which is a piece of advice I got given about 10 years ago by a mentor, and it burned at the time, but it's the piece that stuck with me the most. And that is if you keep giving, people will keep taking, and that is your fault, not theirs. And when that got said to me 10 years or so ago, I was like, rude. But it was true, and it's relevant to everything from what we charge to when we make ourselves available to the terms and conditions that we accept or put out into the world, or like all of it. If you keep giving, people will keep taking, and that is your fault, not theirs. So define what yours are.
Oh my God, that is huge. It's so funny. It's a lesson that I keep learning. I keep getting
Yeah.
myself into those situations. I'm like, why did I say I would do that? Like, that's not what is part of this offering. Like, why did I say, yeah, oh, I'll just do that for you? I'm like, oh my God. But you are so spot on. It is our fault. And I do feel like that's been the theme for this podcast. It's all our fault. We have but in a good way, we do have the power to design our business, to set our boundaries, to set expectations, to not give away the farm, to price correctly, to lead, to have conversations. I think it's been a beautiful conversation. You are absolutely incredible, Claire.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think it's empowering to know that you can change your business, your life at any time. And it's not, there's a whole another podcast episode around just why women, the societal piece around women with boundaries and nice and stuff. So there's no part of me that doesn't sit here and acknowledge that. But I also think that it's exciting to know that at any moment of any day, you get to choose how you want to show up.
I love it. I could not agree with you more. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with the Spark community. That was brilliant.
Thanks for having me.